All right, we are back. It is nearing the end of some of our action series of what we were trying to ask y'all to do. And so we're coming with that last one for the month of October that we're going to cover. And we have just one new person with us, but let's kick off what the topic is. Then we'll ask Matt Topper to introduce himself. So this is Trustmark Month. We have co-opted Cybersecurity Month to focus on those MSPs that are either already working on Trustmark themselves, are afraid of how hard it will be and undoable it'll be to try to demystify just some of the basic things that need to be done for you to move your puck forward, if you will, in that regard. So we are on the fourth one. The first thing we asked was, what is an asset, right? Ultimately, we then talked about deep diving in the control. We then went on to, I may have missed one, I apologize, but anybody want to keep me honest on that? If not, I'll have to take a second, turn my head and remind ourselves. Okay. Yeah. First week was assign some sucker as an ISO, as somebody to be that governant lead of your world and what you're doing, and, have someone that's responsible for managing this program forward. And then we went on to what is an asset, and then deep diving on a control, just in the understanding of, hey, get a little bit deeper and figure out what the breadth is of a control. Matt Topper, since you're here, and it'd be a perfect segue into asking you to introduce yourself, it was essentially like us going through our Monday board and adding hundreds of things we needed to go do to understand the breadth of what needed to be done. But why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll get on to the topic.
Yeah, so for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Matt Topper. I'm the cybersecurity evangelist at ConnectWise, part of the IT Nation team, and have done lots of MSP industry security work at various organizations throughout the years, and also worked with Matt Lee during one of them. So Matt and I were two sides of the same coin. Learned quite a bit of that experience, and now I'm here contributing to the Trustmark Working Group, and that's it. Happy to be here on Friday, and happy my audio is working.
Yes, we hear you perfectly. It's wonderful. Sarah, welcome back. Everybody that doesn't already know you, if you want to just really quickly introduce yourself, and then we'll get to Mark.
Yeah, I'm Sarah. I'm the CEO of TC Communication. We're a cybersecurity focused MSP. We do software development and telecom as well. So thanks for having me, Matt.
And also a member of the working group and shaping all of these controls that we're talking about here. So not sell yourself short. And then Mark Menzies also, if you will, really quickly.
Absolutely. Mark Menzies, President and CTO of Overview Technology Solutions. We're a hybrid solutions provider. I'm a CMMC assessor also, and on the CompTIA Trustmark Working Group, and happy to work with these ladies and gents here on a regular basis. Love doing it. Thank you for having me as well.
And we've gotten into some really interesting arguments over the years in this conversation as well. So it's definitely played out. I'm glad you didn't make the what is an asset one. Awesome.
I tried.
Yeah, I know. It was like this fate was keeping you out. Yeah, there are a lot of women in cyber, and go Sarah. Indeed, I get the pleasure of working with many of them, Alex Spiegel, in our world for negotiating what do we think is a minimum standard for MSPs, having lived in the trenches. What should we adhere to, right? And it's tough sometimes. All right, to the action point. So what we're here to discuss today is this concept of who actually works here. And let's talk about some cases of like what we do know, right? We know our employees pretty well. And I would imagine we at least have a list of who your human assets are that work for you directly. But what's a category that we don't often think about, Mark? I'm going to put you on the spot. What's one of the things we'd really want to get to the point on?
Oof. I mean, the first thing that comes up is, our vendors, who works for our vendors, not just the people you see, but the people that you don't also.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
And also to build on this, so Mark did a killer job at ChannelCon talking about data and data centricity, which data is like the blood of a company, right? And so when we're talking about data, it has a direct correlation to what Mark just said, which is vendors. How do vendors play out, and what data do they have access to, influence upon, or direction over, right? And that aspect of it comes up. So I just got a chuckle out of Topper, so go. What you got, man?
Well, you talked about vendors, and my first thought is that's assuming you even know who all your vendors are in the first place, which is usually issue number one.
I think that is exactly what we're here to talk about, Matt Topper. 100%, right? I bet, and this is what the call to action is very specifically, and we'll get right to it today. I bet you don't have some simple list of all of your vendors, what their contact information is, and then taking it even further, what data systems and data flows are they involved in, and do they have access to, right? I think those would be the pieces that I would want to know. And we don't have to make this up. The control that we're talking about is CIS 15.1, and it says establish and maintain an inventory of service providers. The inventory is to list all known service providers, right? So those that you know about, the people you're paying, the people you've given access to, your cousin Fred, all right, including classifications. Designate one contact for each service provider, an enterprise contact for each service provider. Like, okay, here's who I need to talk to at this service provider. Review and update the inventory annually or when the significant enterprise changes occur. Like, let's tackle that. That might be what, Matt Topper? What kind of enterprise change would occur that I might need to write down a new service provider on?
Right, new vendor, contract ended, and I won't even get into the kind of thing we're sweeping under the rug a little bit, the unknown service providers. We'll just leave that for a later conversation.
Yeah, and perhaps we'll come right back to it and tackle it too, depending on what time we have, because to your point, we can list those we know, but what is that? Secondary access, all those things come up as a conversation. So, all right, so how do we start? We know what the problem is that we're wanting to unpack, which is really who works here, and in Control 15.1, having a list or an inventory of service providers, right? And it needs to have classifications. Let's not overcomplicate that, right? Like, what kind of classifications might we throw out, guys and gals? Let's spitball that. Sarah, what is a classification type you might want to put on a service provider?
What type of data they have access to?
Yes, that's a classification. Do they have sensitive data access? Do they have, sorry, Mark, to trigger you, CUI? Right?
Why you don't have you? It costs you nothing to not say it that way.
I'm sorry, all inside joke.
You're not, but okay.
I'm not sorry, no. Anyways, I digress. Oh, Dave, I'm so sorry. We've been like totally keeping Dave Alton backstage. He's like, knock, knock, knock. Hey, y'all, let me in.
Oh, we're in the same place. Dave and I are in the same place.
Yeah, Mark's just behind me here, so.
Okay. I don't want anybody to suspect that we're in the same place, so I'm gonna go ahead and just do that.
Go back to the prison wall.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to my prison.
So Dave, I don't know how much you caught of that, but do you have anything to add on, like, okay, what kind of data, what kind of classifications might we want to have of a vendor, and just to try to make some spitballing for people at home?
Well, so yeah, I think access to data. Sarah brought up a great point. What do they have access to? I think what data lives there, right? Hey, is it private data? Is it a social security number, right? And think of an HR system, right? Hey, your HR system is probably going to have some social security numbers in it. So is that vendor properly managing?
You tackled a great point. Is the data in my possession and they have access to it, or is the data in their possession and I have access to it?
Right.
Think about SaaS platforms. Think about those things. You nailed a really key element there that I might want to discern upon is like, is this a service provider that's my janitor that has access to my physical locations and therefore has access to these physical things? Or is this a service provider that's providing something in the cloud that I'm consuming from? And Mark, this comes up a lot in shared responsibility, all those things.
And then it's like it's the answer of the DoD doesn't know how many companies have their data. They don't know how many are going to fall in scope of level 1 and level 2. They don't have an exact number. How do they not have an exact number? Because how many providers there are underneath.
Yeah. The layers. David didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. Back to you, bud.
Well, no. I thought it was a great point in that, I think as service providers and specifically technology service providers, oftentimes we really get focused on the technology. But you guys brought up a great point. Like, hey, the janitor walks in the door and you have file cabinets that aren't locked that have sensitive information in it. You got to think about that stuff. That may not be in your kind of purview as far as your control, but everyone is responsible for that data security access. And it's not data security access on computers. It's data security access. Where can they get the data and what data lives there?
Yeah. Exactly. And also how they access might be a classification. Yep. I think the point I'm trying to make, this was brought in from a LinkedIn user, how they have that access, how this company accesses it. Do they access it? Is there some kind of third-party client encryption that I have that means that vendor can't access my data? Like that understanding of the just exposition of the data and where the protections need to lie, I think is the way I might think of that. But the point is, you don't have to overthink it. I just want you to start by actually getting a list of who you have access and what platforms and tools you use. Matt Topper, you and I went through this very example. How would you start? How would you start figuring out what service providers you need to look at and decide and classify?
So one of the easiest ways, look at things like your SSO platform. But the most effective way tends to be go talk to finance, see who's getting the bill.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Absolutely.
I was gonna say I have a story about that. Whenever you're ready.
There's just one thing I want to add before you're starting, Mark, and that is where a lot of us are talking like MSP or TSP, depending on your nomenclature. I would really suggest adding as a classification, do they have access to client data? Yes or no?
Amen. Yeah, especially in the MSP context or third-party service provider context where you're a supply chain access point. Yeah, 100%, Matt. Mark, over.
Yeah, I like trying to kill two birds with one stone. I feel bad for the birds though, but we had a lot of recent cleanup to do in our accounts payable. So my EA and I have been working on that for months. She's been working very diligently on it, and as we're going through it, the questions that we're asking and the information that we're putting into ConnectWise and creating some custom fields for, budget access, things like that. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm literally satisfying this control. So I have my EA unwittingly completing 15.1, 90+% of it. And it's you don't just have to have your IT people, your internal people doing this. Just there are people in operations, there are people in unexpected places that can help you with this and help spread out that load. And to what Matt was saying, Matt Topper was saying, talk to finance, talk to operations, see who's paying your bills, look at your credit card statements.
Yep. Yeah, and I think for the easiest wins, to your point, work with those teams individually. Matt Topper, that was exactly what I was looking for there. Was you basically said, let's see all the things we're paying. Let's dig into what those are. Are those being sold to my clients? Are those being resold to my clients? So there's actually a business function in this too that does come into play, especially if you're an MSP. You may have these things where you've been paying for, and I'll give a great example of this. There was a former MSP, it's a good friend of mine, that was saying, hey, Matt, I heard about this thing for Slash and Grab, and we've patched, we're in great shape. And I'm like, awesome. And then a week and a half later, he says, man, we have an active incident for it. I said, what do you mean? You patched? You were already in great shape. He said, yeah. One of the companies we bought 5 years ago actually sold a copy of this to a client and was still actively managing that. We didn't actually realize there was another subscription for this that we weren't managing, and they actually left it. And like, you with me? So you're in this position of like, I think going through to what Matt Topper was saying from that perspective of actually just start with what you're paying, figure out if you can, and even to your point, Mark, have an EA potentially, or an internal procurement person, or someone that's in compliance or governance or something, look through it and try to say, can I tell you where every one of these line items came from that's a software vendor, right? And what they were tied to your point. Yeah.
And I'll tell you a small, really helpful thing that comes from this is when you go through and do this, those are assets, right? Yeah. So add them to your asset list.
You're on 2.1 as well. You're blowing my mind right now, Dave Bolton.
Wait, and one more. And chances are you're gonna be able to stop paying for stuff that you aren't actually using anymore, because
that's why we did it. That's
a good point.
We did it. It's crazy.
Yeah. Or start billing for stuff you're not billing for.
Right. Oh, that's the other one. Like we have done this exercise multiple times. You kind of go through it and you're like, oh my God, we're not paying. We've been paying for that person's backups for like 2 years. We haven't been charging them. Like, what are we doing? Right. That's the kind of stuff you find when you start to dig into this. So don't look at this as a security exercise. Look at this as a business efficiency exercise, because you will gain a ton of efficiency out of just listing out who are we paying for software.
Yeah. And buy-in from executives to do said function. Right. There's a clear one-to-one business outcome, but then it turns into other security things too, right? Sarah, do you have anything to add, from just to toss it to you without prep, but to add for this on your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So not only from a security perspective, but also a continuation of your company. So what happens if you're a smaller company, the person who's in charge is no longer available, they quit, they move on, whatever the case is, they're not available. How do you know who to contact? How many hours are you going to spend trying to find out that information and document it? So if you can have that, then you can just pass it on to whoever's going to be taking over after you. Or if there's an issue, you know exactly who to reach out to.
Yeah. 100% to your point of like continuity of operations, right, is the conversation point. So
absolutely.
I think we're beating this a little to death, but start with, great. Here we have like Rocket Money. Sorry, and I will call them and get your money back too, bro.
I'm sure you're not giving any personal or private data to Rocket Money to figure all that stuff out at all.
No doubt. And so many security functions have great business benefits. That's exactly it, right? We talk about this, and I made a corollary early of, I have this concrete truck guy, or they pour concrete to make big building foundations and roads and such. And I asked him, what makes you money? And his answer was getting a concrete truck filled with the right amount of aggregate, cement, mix of water to a job site every 30 minutes, delivering on constant basis until the contiguous pour has been made. Great. What happens when a driver calls in? Don't worry about it. I got extra drivers waiting right now. I have people sitting on standby. We have extra capacity. Cool. What about a truck if it breaks down? We have a shop we can go to. We have our own shop. We have a second truck. Wonderful. What about when your tracking software, Trimble All Track, goes down because you're on a single server? Okay, well, you just need to start thinking about that. And to your point, as we do these hygienic things of understanding what software, where it falls in the business function, how it ties to what data, who has access to what, it makes a lot of functions better from a business operations perspective, to Sarah's point of continuity of operations. If they get rid of Matt Lee, then there's all this stuff that's known, that's not tribal knowledge, that's built in, that's tied to a system function that you can look at in a map and understand flows and what access things have. So get off on a tangent real quick. All right.
Well, hey, just to put us off on a further tangent, if you guys think about it, like if you go look at valuations and you're looking to do M&A transactions and whether you want to be bought or sold, having this stuff in your back pocket to show investors, to show VC, to show whoever is kind of going to back the deal, this shows not only a security level, right? This also shows an operational efficiency level that a lot of businesses don't have. So your valuation goes up by just straight up knowing this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the acquisitions I've been involved with ask it to go be mapped. And they definitely look somewhat diminutively. It slows down the transaction. It now has to be done anyway, and it's done in a hasty fashion or at some higher cost or things of that nature, right? So I think having it done, and also to go a little further, if you don't already know what service providers you have, what software you have, what assets you have, how are you ever going to do a data flow diagram? How are you ever going to show where things function and how they're tied together? You're just going to guess, right? All right. Anybody else have something to add to just the one takeaway which we want, which is go start with having a service provider list. And if we want to review those pieces, it is essentially designating a certification as well as an enterprise contact. So let's talk on that strategy just for a little bit. So now we have a list, Mark, and we know all the players. How do you figure out which contact to use? What do you do there? I mean, I know we're probably a simple piece, but.
So like that might be something that might be triable knowledge that I'll have. I mean, we're using ConnectWise Manage for to store all this data, where what the contact information is and such, because our engineers have access to that. And how do we decide if we're not sure or something like that? We would bring it up in one of our L10s. Hey, this is a vendor we have. Don't know how to access them. We don't even know who uses it. Put it down as an issue. We'll discuss it. And have the leadership team or the service team or somebody go through it. No one knows who they are. No one knows what they do. We log in. We don't see anything. We're like, okay, we don't need them anymore. And then you remove them from the equation. You make them inactive. You don't need contact information then.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you actually touched on that. It's really, how do you get rid of a service provider and what are the things that need to be part of it? Sarah, do you want to add anything to that on managing the actual removal of service providers as you go through this process? What are some considerations?
I would consider whether or not you can completely remove them or if you want to archive them so you don't lose any data.
Yeah.
Once your data is done and deleted, it's gone.
Yeah, that is actually probably one of the biggest points there is don't kill stuff unless you know the data is no longer valuable, contractual obligations have been met, it has been backed up or managed in some form or fashion. Yeah,
exactly.
That's a brilliant point there. Anybody else want to go?
So when you're thinking about contacts, my first thing is go to the contract, assuming you have one. It's usually in there. The trickier ones and the ones that you're going to find difficult to find an answer for are when you have some type of commodity cloud service that doesn't necessarily have a salesperson, account manager type involved. You just put the company CC in. And there's not necessarily a good answer as far as who your contact is at that point. You should have to, when you're writing your policies around third-party service providers, you have to account for, do you have a process to approve a vendor like this? Some vendors simply won't give you a named contact, right? You put the credit card in, that's it. So can you work around that in your policies, or do you have this has to have a named contact, or does it depend on the sensitivity level of data in there, right? There's a number of ways to swing at that.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting is if I was reading that as an assessor for Trustmark and I saw that someone had gotten to the nuance of that statement of saying, we do not have a named contact. However, our best method would be to follow support channels through the actual place we acquire this. We know that that next step would provide us a contact escalation through these paths. Like, I would read that and go, you've thought about this. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And to your point, contractually, what they might be obligated to. I don't want to miss these two comments because one was talking about Matt is basically saying buy 2 coffee machines and always have a backup. But the follow-up comment is what is so delicious because it is, if coffee is critical to functioning for me, yes, no single point of failure on critical infrastructure. I love you so very much on this.
I actually want to address that. He doesn't necessarily need to buy 2 coffee makers.
That's true.
His backup plan might be that
I
he
could have logical
goes to Starbucks.
redundancy. I could have actual coffee already in the fridge that I've somehow vacuum pressed. I mean, I'm not saying you could replace coffee with the word sparkling water or something like that. But let's just say, yes, there might be redundant methodologies other than duplicity in the production facilities. Yeah, I digress.
Yeah, I mean, look, when we did this back in the in the enterprise days, having 2 of everything was really expensive when you were
Sure is.
and stuff. So
yeah.
What we would typically do is we would contract with an outside service provider and say, hey, you need to pull a truck up if we get into this situation. Yeah. You can think of your service providers as pieces of hardware, right? Hey, I'm going to use Azure for X, Y, and Z. If Azure blows up, great. My backup plan is I'm going to go use Google. Now, how easy that is and everything else.
Genuinely though, Dave, don't miss that, right, Matt Topper? What did we talk about as our primary, secondary, and tertiary communication plans in a disaster, right? Like we had failover from Teams to Zoom as an escapement, and from that we had other mechanisms behind it, right? Like, so it's like once you know those service providers and their linear functions, you can start to see where those failovers are. And to Mark Menzies' point earlier, where sometimes duplicity that's not needed is, and you can kill it. And also, it brings us back to Matt, when we were playing that game, we went down like half the number of applications after going through that exercise, right? And yes, I'm not even being hyperbolous. Some of that was CRUD installed by random technician number 4 before they took away local admin rights. But yeah, anyways.
Dave is bringing up a fantastic point, though, right? So if you're going into Azure and your backup is AWS or your backup is Google, a risk there is, let's say that you're, from a business perspective, taking advantage of some crazy new feature that only exists in Azure, right? You're introducing a significant risk because now you have no backup plan. Same thing with if you have some innovative SaaS vendor who's the only solution in that space. You need to think about that as well, because sometimes there is no backup, and are you willing to trade that risk for the innovation?
It's a concept called vendor lock-in, right? And that's the term that it comes down to, and it's especially poignant in things like cloud resources, right? To your point, and third-party people are doing very specialized things, not reproducible.
Well, and again, I think, Matt, you bring up a great point. This is a risk conversation, right? That innovation may be required for you to be on the cutting edge for your clients. But you have to understand the risk of you are on that cutting edge, and that might put you in a position of, I can't really replicate this anywhere else. I'm kind of hosed if this.
But if you know that, you can guard against it. You can ensure some of those challenges potentially. There's all kinds of things that comes into.
Or you can just notify, right? Like, hey, look, if this happens,
here's where we're at.
This is where we're at, and we know that going in, and we're not. It's not ostrich, head in the sand kind of situation. It's that was a conscious business decision that we're going to take that risk because we think it's worth it. So that's exactly how you do risk management, right? It's got to be worth it.
Well, I think we have gotten to the point we wanted to get to and brought a point that basically go get a list of where your service providers are. Have a list of what software you use as an extensibility of that. They usually go very close to hand in hand these days, right? And we also learned that coffee is critical infrastructure in certain definitions, and that is important, damn it.
Can be.
I hope y'all have actually done some of these things. I really, really, really appreciate it. We did get one more comment of Wayne Selk is smiling about the risk convo. And maybe that's what we leave with is, right, that risk profile is being forced upon you to shift over time because of the threat landscape, because of the impact, because of those things. As long as you're shifting with it and thinking about it from a risk perspective and making educated business decisions, I think you're moving forward. And understanding is key as always to close us out. Anybody have any closing thoughts that we haven't covered yet?
Matt, one thing wanted to bring up. you don't have to have some fancy software. Grab an Excel spreadsheet. Just start. Just find a place to start. Spreadsheet works if you have a document like IT Glue that you're already using. You can put the information in there. Just create a subfolder of your vendors.
Write it down on a yellow pad. Like it really doesn't matter.
It doesn't even matter.
Yeah, exactly. It's like just start, right? We've been saying this through all of October and all of these sessions. Just start doing this stuff. It has security benefits. It has operational benefits. It has efficiency benefits, and it probably saves you some money, right? Because you're gonna find things you're like, we don't even use that anymore. Why are we paying for it, right? Yeah. This is the kind of stuff that if you're working on your business, you're going to understand this better, and you're going to have a way easier time exiting, building or growing or whatever it is that you want to do. But you have to start and take action. And I think that's the key to this whole series is start and take action.
I love it. I feel bad for the birds, Menzies, right? Also, I'll leave it with sign up for Trustmark. And back to that conversation on knowing, right? Just remember that knowing times 2 equals battle, right? And just don't, knowing is half the battle. That's it. I forgot. Okay, yeah. Sorry, corny joke, dad joke to exit on. Sign up for the Trustmark. Come through it with us. I think you'll find this is one of the only platforms that really understands we will meet you where you are, and we'll guide you to where you need to be. And I'm very proud to be a part of that with these fine human beings as well as others. And Sarah, you got awkwardly left up on screen because I suck as a producer.